Good evening, everyone. We are now continuing Leviticus chapter 23, and we ended at verse 14. Just for our information, yesterday was 14th Nisan, and today is 15th Nisan. And this is also what we call a holy convocation, and it is also a Sabbath, a rest, and it is the first day of unleavened bread. And it's unleavened bread for the next 6 days. And the next 6 days at the end would be the seventh day. That would be the 21st. On the 21st would also be a holy convocation. And so we find that on the first day and on the seventh day, there will be a rest, as we can see. So there is a period of 7 days here. Now, we also say that there is this day here on the 15th also be known as a rest, Shabbat. And so on the 16th was the waving of the Omer. And that is how we have established it as we ended yesterday. So today we continue. As far as we're concerned, we have established a couple of things. One is that the 15th is a Shabbat. And so understand that Shabbat does not necessarily mean the seventh day of the week, but it does mean a rest. And so this would be the rest because it is counting from the first day of the unleavened bread. The 16th would be the waving of the Omer. And then on the 21st, there will be another rest. However, what we are seeing is sometime in that 7 days of the Chag Hamatzah, we would eventually do find the customary seventh day of the week, and that will also be Shabbat. When we come to verse 15, verse 15 says, "And then you shall count for yourselves." Now, this word count really is to, I guess you can call it uh, a recording of numbers, a record of numbers. And that's why it's translated as count, basically to be able to enumerate. I guess that would be a way of looking at it, to tally, to enumerate. And the issue here is from the day after the Shabbat. So the day after the Shabbat is still referring to this Shabbat, the day after the Shabbat, which would be the 16th. The day after the Shabbat is the waving of the Omer. Omer is a bunch of harvest that is bunched together from the first fruits and to be waved by the priests. And we read that yesterday. And so we are still referring to that same day, the day after the Shabbat would be the 16th. From the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, and remember this word, the sheaf of the wave offering is the Omer. Now, I'm just referring to the Hebrew words because this is how the Jews will refer to it. They don't call it the sheaf, it's called the Omer. And so, what's important then is to understand that it is that same day you wave the Omer, which is the day after the Shabbat, which is the 15th, which is the first day of the unleavened bread, which is the holy convocation. And the Shabbat is a holy convocation. Now, we begin to read something else. In verse 15, the last part of it, it says here, 7 Sabbaths shall be completed. Now, the Hebrew gives us 7 Sabbaths. This would be the plural for Shabbat, right? 7 Shabbatot. Shabbatot would be the plural for Sabbath. So it is proper to call it Sabbaths, but for our purposes, it is 7 weeks. Here you find the word Shabbatot would be referring to weeks, a period of 7 days. So we find that the seventh day is called a Shabbat. The whole week is also called a Shabbat. The cycle of 7 days are called weeks. And so we have here 7 Shabbats or 7 weeks. Shall be completed. The word completed means to be, I guess we can call it, should be perfect, should be full, should mature, or it should be uh, finished. So this word complete means to allow the 7 weeks to finish. When you have 7 weeks, then it is 7 times 7. That is what that means. So 7 Shabbats would be 7 times 7, and that would be 49 days. So it says, count 50 days to the day after the seventh Shabbat. So what does that mean? That literally means on the next day, that would be the 50th day. So you notice it is the day after the seventh Shabbat, after the seventh week, after the 49th day. And then it says, then you shall offer a new grain offering to the Lord. So it says here you should present a new mincha. Grain offering is a mincha. And that would be the instructions. Now, remember, I had constantly reminded everyone that whatever we read in the text is very much a high level, the gist of what is being done, but not the details, because much of the details that the Jewish people would be referring to would be in their oral tradition passed down from generation to generation. But we continue here. It says, you shall bring from the dwellings, it says, 2 wave loaves of 2/10 of an ephah. Now, this word, 2 wave loaves, the idea here is that's actually bread, right? Two loaves of bread. And this is not sheaf, this is bread. Lechem, you set aside 2 loaves that is made from 2/10 of an ephah, and you make it from fine flour. You bake it with leaven. Notice at this point in time, we have gone way past the Chag Hamatzah, the unleavened bread. Now we are at this particular feast, which is on the 50th day, the day after the seventh week, seventh Shabbat. And you bring two loaves of bread made from 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour, bake it with leaven. The first, this is the what we call the first offering to the Lord. They are called the first fruits. This will be the first of all the offerings to Jehovah. And you shall offer with the bread 7 lambs of the first year without blemish, one young bull, and 2 rams. Please bear in mind all these description of the first year without blemish. They are all very much part and parcel of the standard offering. Whenever you bring something to God, it must be perfect. Perfect means without blemish. And that would be the complaint that God had in the book of Malachi, the book of Malachi, where the priests actually had offered uh, offerings that is not perfect. They are full of blemishes. So always remember, this is at the very early stage of the giving of the law. It is without any doubt that these are very Eastern Oriental. When you visit somebody of high status, you never bring anything that is broken. You would always find the best of what you have and offer it to the person of high regard, like visiting a king, an emperor, and in this case, the king of Israel. That would be Jehovah God Himself. He wants 7 lambs of the first year before the 12th month, perfect, one young bull, and 2 rams. And they are to be offered as Olah, burnt offering, which is a thanksgiving to Jehovah with their mincha, that would be the grain offering. And with the mincha, then you will also have a libation, uh nesek. Nesek is the thing, that's what they call it, the nesek, the drink offerings. Nesek. And it's an offering made by fire, that would be an ishe. Always remember, they're all in the same class of words used in Leviticus chapters 1 to 7 for a sweet aroma to the Lord. Whenever we talk about a sweet aroma, would be a reyak ni hoak, a sweet smell that pleases God. In verse 19, after that, this would be an and then. You shall sacrifice. Now, this word sacrifice is a tsevak. You have to slaughter one he goat, kid of the goat. This would be a he goat. So it's not always sheep, but this is from the goat family and is offered as a khatat. That would be a sin offering. And then you find you have 2 male lambs, and that would be a ram. Male lambs are rams of the first year as a sevak of a peace offering. Now, the peace offering is a shalamim, a completion of 50 days. As you can see, 50 days are always with reference to something very important of a freedom like the year of Jubilee. Now, that is a point to be made after a set of 7 weeks, the day after. It is a special day. And so the priest, the Kohen, shall wave them with the bread of the first fruits. It's the bread uh, that is the first of the harvest that they make as a wave offering before the Lord. Now, the idea of a wave offering is a te- tenufa. I guess that's what it's called, a tenufa, a wave offering with the two lambs. So you wave with the two lambs. They shall be special to God for the priest. Now, what does that mean? It means that whatever is waved is given for the priest. The next part is verse 21. It says, and you shall proclaim on the same day, you shall designate, you can call it designate. You can appoint this day. I think appointing this day seems to be a good way of describing it. You shall uh, implement this day. You shall proclaim on this same day that it is a holy convocation to you. Now, by calling it a holy convocation, it would be a Shabbat as well. So on the 50th day, it is a Shabbat. So there are a lot of Shabbats, there are a lot of rests. And by describing, you shall do no customary or occupational work. That means it's not something that you normally do. It shall be a statute forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations. What it's trying to tell us is that this particular day is typically called the Shavuot. Now, the idea of Shavuot, uh, I guess you can actually call it the feast of weeks, where they are always about the Shabbat or the Shabbatot, right? The feast of weeks. And here from verses 15 to 21 describes that very much at a high level. Are they able to do all of these things? No, because there is no temple and there are no priests to do these things. But it is understood that it is a very particularly special day that God has appointed, like an appointment, an appointed time to come to the temple or come to the tabernacle to actually complete these rituals. Verse 22. Now, verse 22 talks about the harvest of your land. Why do we talk about the harvest of your land? Because by this time, this would be the time of harvest. 50 days after the unleavened bread. 50 days would be Shavuot. That would be the weeks. And this is the period of harvest. And so at this point in time, they are duly reminded when you cut up from the harvest of your land. And you can only do that when you are in the land, not now in the wilderness. So much of all these instructions are really for them in the land, God's rules. You shall not wholly reap. Now, this word shall not wholly reap means you shall not completely cut out. we have seen this before, that they are told to make sure that the fields themselves are not completely removed. You are to leave the corners of your field when you reap. Now, this idea of reap is harvest, right? Harvest is katsar, you are to cut off the top. So basically, the idea of reap and harvest, they come from the same word, right? Comes from the same word. It is talking about the fact that you have the growth, and then you have all the tops. And when you cut them, that would be reap. So you're cutting the top when you reap. You shall not completely remove all the corners of your field. You leave them. You shall not gather any gleaning from your harvest. Now, this word gleaning actually means gathering. It literally gives us the idea of gathering. Now, what does that mean? It means that when you are actually reaping, some of it may fall on the ground, right? They may fall on the ground. And if they fall on the ground, you are to just leave it there on the ground. And so this is the expression, do not glean. Don't gather together all your harvest. And basically don't bunch up whatever you have cut and then you've dropped it on the floor. You shall leave them for the poor and for the ger. And this is important. The idea of poor here means they are the needy, they are the afflicted, they are the humbled. For something to do in their lives, something happened that does not allow them to behave and to enjoy life like every other people. So we call them the poor. They are the needy, they are the afflicted. Now, the second part here is the stranger, and this is the ger. The ger are those who live among them who have embraced the God of Israel, the nation of Israel, and the people of Israel. Very much a person like Ruth when we read later on. And so the ger and the poor. Now, understand this, when they are poor, they may have sold their land. And so they don't have any land to tend to. When they are a ger, they don't own land at all. And so many of them may be requiring help. And because they have left their homeland, they have joined Israel as a nation. They left Egypt and they have followed their friends or their masters, and they want to be part of the nation. They have seen what Jehovah did in Egypt, but they are in no place to inherit the land that God is giving to the people of Israel. And so they are called Ger. And God is telling them, you have to leave it for them. All these are to leave for them because this is the law of gleaning. Now, it's been mentioned a couple of times in the Bible, particularly in the book of Leviticus. And it always ends with this. It says here, Ani Yehovah Elohim. Remember, we are talking a lot about this. Ani Yehovah. Every time you read this, it merely tells us this is very important that they must do. They cannot ignore. I am God. I'm telling you to do that because life is sacred. This is about the sanctity of life. Let me briefly explain this. We are here at the period of Shavuot, and this will be the springtime, 50 days after uh, tomorrow. Uh, then you will find that you will place us into the time of the modern day June period, uh, almost entering into summer. And that is when they are busy harvesting. When there is a harvest, understand that the harvest is not meant to be eaten at one go. They are all kept. And so they are kept by the owners, they are kept to be sold, they are kept to be traded. There is a business around it. But God is now saying, Ani Jehovah. And so it is very important for everyone to pay attention because the poor and the stranger has no way of taking care of themselves. Here, by definition, you leave them for the poor and the stranger means that they are in no way able to harvest anything because they don't own the land. And so when Ruth went to the fields of Boaz, she was a ger. And so she was there gathering the gleaning. So we call it the gleaning by picking up all of these. Now, obviously, in the story of Ruth and Boaz, Boaz says, "No, you should drop some on the ground purposely so that she's got more to pick up." But that is really taking care of her. Here, the law says when you cut, leave the corners of the field and leave whatever has fallen on the ground. The poor and the stranger can come and pick them up. Why? Because they will be working in the field and their pay, so to speak, will be whatever they have picked up, and the owner of the field will give it all to them. In that case, they will have something to take care of themselves while making sure that they are not embarrassed, that they have not been made any lower than they are, that they are treated well. And from an Eastern Oriental viewpoint, that you have not dropped their faces, you have kept their dignity. And that is the case. It is about the dignity of life. You cannot embarrass them that they are already without any ability, and you further embarrass them. It means that you will make them lose their dignity. So it's very important from a psychological profile in the nation of Israel that God wants to make sure that everybody's faces are maintained. Their dignity in life, they may be poor, but they are still human. They are made in the image of God, and so they need to be taken care of. And so, if you recall the phrase "love your neighbor as you would love yourself," this is about being able to feed yourselves and to feed your neighbor who is unable to. And so the law itself is being put in place that is going to be very different from other nations. And when they practice this, they are actually representing Jehovah, because Jehovah takes care of the poor and needy. And how does Jehovah takes care of the poor and needy? By making sure those who are able and rich and can afford, that they are responsible to represent God to take care of those who can't help themselves. And in so doing, maintain the dignity of their lives, that is not only caring for the rich and powerful, but particularly to take care of the poor, the needy, and the ger. Now, obviously, we will also find that there will be the need to take care of the widow and also the fatherless, because it is a patriarchal society where men, if a woman is without a man, if a child is without their father, There will be no man to fend for them, like very much like Ruth and Naomi. And so they are to be taken care of, but not so much as hand out in public. Because when you give a hand out in public, you are literally dropping their face, so to speak. You are making them feel even smaller. So begging is actually not encouraged because begging will cause a person to lose dignity. And so the rich and the able are always reminded there will always be the poor, the needy, the widow, the fatherless, and the care amongst them. And they ought to take care of these people when they are able to, but in a way where it respects their dignity, because life is sacred. Nobody is to look down on somebody else who is poorer. And so this law here finds itself in the feast of Shavuot. And very interestingly, this completes the spring part or the early part of the year of the appointed times of God. Now, so far, what we have covered from yesterday and today, covering the earlier parts from the period of 14th of Nisan all the way to the period 2 months thereafter, 50 days, you'll find that they are all there to remind the Hebrew people that when God saved them and rescued them from Egypt, they are to constantly remember and pass it down as part and parcel of their culture. So, although we are reading this as part of a Levitical law, as they practice it generation after generation, and all the things that they know to pass down as oral tradition, this is how Eastern Oriental people develop cultures. See, when you first come out of Egypt, you have nothing. The only thing that you know is what you have seen and heard and experienced in the land of Egypt. And worse is that you're going into the land of Canaan. And so all these laws are to shape the lives of the people. God's people, God's rules. Now, obviously, whenever we talk about rules, instructions, laws, we seldom think about it if we place ourselves into the position of these Israelites and we are told about all these feasts. These feasts are appointed times. What they do, according to the instructions of God, is very much to build into their lives a new culture, a new way of life, a new behavior, a new reason to follow, to do special things on special days. Because all these dates are not given by man, they are given by God. And hence, to the Israelites, it is extremely important how they dress, how they not cut their hair, what do they do. They have all their rituals. All of these is to build in a new way of life, a new culture for them, so to speak. And hence, they will set them apart from all the other nations. Now, obviously, I had said to us many times that whenever they are dealing with the rules between human beings, to love their neighbors as they love themselves, is to make sure that they are here to take care of their own. And so, a law like the law of gleaning here is very much to make sure that they are to ensure that within the nation of Israel, the poor people are taken care of and they do not lose their sense of belonging in the tribe, in the nation, and in their role before God, that they are just like everybody else. And God doesn't have a a class. God doesn't say the rich can do this, the poor can't. God, as you can see in all the offerings in chapters 1 through 7 of Leviticus, allows them various ways of making offerings depending on their affordability. And so at this point in time, we conclude the early year feasts at appointed times to make sure that they take care of their own, they remember God, they first remember God, harvest to take care of their own, and the spring and summer events will be over by verse 22. And with this, we come to the end of our session today, and we will continue from verse 23 tomorrow for the second part of the year.